Good evening. Welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting for July 14th. We're going to call the meeting to order at 6:33 p.m. And I don't need to do a roll call because everybody's present and nobody is in the Zoom room. So we are calling the meeting to order. And actually, our first order of business is to go into an executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Paragraph 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Monomoy Regional Educators Association, MREA, Unit C. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the district's bargaining or litigating position, and the chair so declares it. And we will be coming out for open session approximately 7 p.m. May I have a motion to adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. And a roll call vote. Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
Mr. Osceola?
Aye.
Ms. Games?
Aye.
Ms. Long?
Aye.
And the chair says aye, so we will go into executive session and be back around 7 p.m. Thank you.
The recording has stopped.
4, 3, 2, 1. Well, like,
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, welcome back. We are back to our regular session public meeting at 7:01 PM. We called our meeting to order earlier at 6:30, and we adjourned to executive session, and we are now back to our public session. And our first order of business is approval of the June 24th minutes. Do I have a motion
so moved.
and a second?
Seconded?
Any comments or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Next on the agenda is public comment. Anybody here for public comment? Seeing nobody in Zoom and nobody in person, we will move on to the next order of business, which is reports and discussions. And first up is Cindy Gushy, sorry, and discussing the Educational Support Professionals, or ESP, Bill of Rights. Welcome.
Thank you.
Or not welcome, but welcome back, because you're always here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Cindy Gushy, 621A, Route 28, Howardsport. I'm a SPED assistant at Howard Elementary School. I am a member of the MTA State ESP Committee and a member of the MTA ESP Bill of Rights Task Force. I'm here tonight to talk to you about the MTA ESP Bill of Rights. ESP stands for Education Support Professionals. There are 9 categories of ESPs. We only have 3 currently in this bargaining unit. Paraprofessionals or paraeducators, clerical services, which is the administrative assistants, food service, but there are also areas for health and student service, custodial and maintenance service, transportation services, security services, skilled trade services, and technical services. There are 100 ESPs in Monomoy and approximately 25,000 ESPs statewide. The MTA ESP Bill of Rights was created to help ESPs earn a better living without having to work multiple jobs. A task force was created, and about 2 years ago, a survey was sent out to all ESPs pre-K to 12. We didn't look at higher ed, just pre-K to 12. The survey results were sent to Rutgers University, who tabulated the results and identified 7 areas that were most often listed as areas of need across the Commonwealth. These 7 areas are a living wage, affordable health care, health insurance, health and safety, paid family and medical leave, job security, recognition as educators, and affordable education to strengthen careers. ESPs ensure that students achieve at their highest level, keep students emotionally and physically healthy and safe, engage students and keep them connected to the larger school community, and may be the one caring and supportive adult that every child needs to succeed. We provide instruction and academic support, challenge and motivate students by maintaining high expectations, and meet the needs of the whole child by fostering a positive learning environment. Monomoy Regional School District has worked to make sure that areas of the Bill of Rights are available to ESPs, such as affordable health insurance, health and safety, paid family and medical leave, and job security. There are professional development funds available. The surveys show that technology and managing student behavior are areas mentioned as needs. In-person, practice-based, collaborative professional development activities have been noted as the most effective. We continue to work on the area of a living wage. As of July 1st, actually I did it again today, so July 14th, the living wage calculator for Harwich and Chatham, based on working 182 days, 6.5 hours a day, has risen to $32,178 is what the cost of living would be for someone to survive on Cape Cod, which comes to $27.20 per hour. Next year, ESPs paraprofessionals on step 1 will be earning $19.73 per hour here at Monomoy. The Monomoy Regional School District has been a leader that many other school districts have looked up to for guidance, especially this past year and a half in regards to educational issues. All school districts on the Cape and Islands have endorsed the MTA ESP Bill of Rights. I am asking that Monomoy once again be a leader and be one of the first school committees and districts to endorse the Bill of Rights.
Is that it?
I'm ready.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Cindy?
Just
Tina?
Just one quick question. So I'm assuming the living wage, so this is current, correct? I guess this is based 2021?
This is updated July 1st.
Oh, it was, okay, that's what, okay.
So that's why Barnstable County has gone from $28,434, because I checked like different towns and I kept Xing all the way up and going back in, comes to $32,178. It's what they would say that the living wage would be.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I know this is just the first reading, and then we'll bring it up again at the next meeting.
So you're asking us to approve the 7 bills of rights?
Just to endorse it.
To endorse the Bill of Rights?
Yep.
And you
We're working on
mentioned,
it.
so you mentioned that with Monomoy, the ESPs that are covered, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but covered under this would be the paraprofessionals, the clerical or admin assistants, and food services, in addition to the teaching assistants?
Well,
Or that's a
teaching-
paraprofessionals?
That's also the paraprofessionals.
Okay,
So those would be, that would be Unit B and Unit C.
okay,
Because maintenance has, even though there are other districts in the Commonwealth, they have maintenance and they have transportation, their unions are separate from the MTA unions that we have here.
correct, okay. And you said there's approximately, or there is 100 ESPs at Monomoy?
That's what, I got that figure from, I updated it today from Ellen,
Okay,
and I updated the one from MTA today too also.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then you mentioned that other needs or other areas that are kind of weak are technology and managing student behavior.
That's for under professional development.
That's what is needed
That's what is needed.
for the
So
ESPs.
the ESP is technology, which we've been working on, but we can still continue.
Okay. I think that was all my questions. Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Cindy? Okay.
And I'll be here at the next meeting anyway, so if anybody has any other additional questions, they can.
I just have one quick one, just out of curiosity. Let's see, 1, 2, it's under health and safety. So the whistleblower protections, so it's under health and safety. I'm assuming that's just, I guess, for their own protection, I suppose. I'm just wondering why it was put under there. I guess it makes sense it would fall in that category. Do you know?
Because of abuse,
Okay.
I was there, and then there was, we've had the past issue, especially in the last year and a half, with people about HVAC systems, and not, making sure that there was no retribution for the person who came forward and said, listen, my windows don't open. It's January, and my heater's only blowing cold air. Those would be some of the areas that they were looking at the whistleblower.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I think we're all set. Thank you very much. All right, so we'll bring this back at our next meeting to have additional questions and a potential vote to endorse it as a school committee. All right, so next up on our agenda is the subcommittee assignments. And so what I did was I was able to take, I believe, most everybody's choices and tie you in. There is one mistake that I did make on my typed version that was not on my handwritten version. Under superintendent evaluation, it should not be Jackie. Jackie's name should be crossed off. It should be Joe Osceola under superintendent evaluation, which will break down a little bit more evenly so that Jackie's not on 3 subcommittees and Joe's not on 1 subcommittee, so that will help a little bit. There were 2 highlighted areas. One is warrant and payroll. Nobody signed up for warrant and payroll, so I went ahead and put myself in there. So if anybody else would like to jump in and do warrant and payroll, I'd be happy to not, although I do live fairly close to the admin office, so I could kind of tumble down the hill to get to it. So I'm signed up for warrant and payroll, but I was looking for an alternate to do that. Mr. Osceola, you'll be my alternate. Excellent.
Yay. There you
Thank
go.
you. So we'll add Joe in as alternate, and that's just if I can't attend. And then the other area was under the liaison to the Select Board and Finance Committees for Chatham. Typically, it's the chair and the vice chair, so there's a Chatham and Harwich representative, and then there's a secondary person in that role as well, in case I can't make it to one of the selectmen's meetings or finance meetings, or if there's 2 meetings running simultaneously, or if we just need additional people. So being that there's only 1 Chatham person missing, so Danielle can't jump up. So we could assign Danielle that because she's not here. That would be kind of mean. But we can also wait and just fill somebody in, and we can wait to talk to Danielle, unless somebody, either Joe or Jackie, has a burning desire to be the kind of, it's almost like an alternate, but not labeled as such. So we'll wait and have a further discussion about somebody there. So for now, I'll be the sole representative there. And so at this point, without objection, this will be the list for the 2021-2022 school year. And if we add somebody in later, we can take another vote as needed. But with the change, making Joe in superintendent evaluation instead of Jackie, and adding Joe as warrant and payroll, this will be our list without objection. Excellent, thank you. And moving on to the regional agreement work group. We had a meeting with the work group on Monday afternoon. I'm sorry, this week is not in order for my brain. So we had a work group meeting where Superintendent Carpenter presented the regional agreement changes that he presented at our last meeting. And at that work group, there was a representative from each select board, Board of Selectmen, one from Chatham, one from Harwich. The town administrator and town manager were there, the finance directors were there, and then Tina, myself, and Terry were there. Joe was unable to make that, and then Dr. Carpenter was there. And I think what came out of that meeting was a lot of appreciation for what was presented. So again, Dr. Carpenter presented the proposed change to the regional agreement that is from, and I'm blanking on the school district.
Greylock.
Mount Greylock. So the changes that were similar to Mount Greylock's regional agreement regarding the assessment costs. And so we kind of dove into that a little bit further. And again, there was some questions and little intricacies wondering about what if this happens and what if that happens, those questions that came up. But I think there was a general understanding that we were coming to a kind of a consensus on what potentially could happen with a change with the regional agreement. I don't know if Tina or Scott, you'd like to add in any immediate thoughts. Then at the end, I can say what we kind of summed up at the end. But any comments of what was said at the meeting?
I think you summarized it well. I think it was a good discussion. I think that there are clearly, I think I would summarize things as there's a want and desire to see us move something forward, and there's a want and desire, particularly from voices from Harwich, to continue working beyond this, and regional agreements are things that are revisited. So yes, let's go address and fix what we know needs to be fixed now, and let's take some thoughtful time to fix problems that we may see, out there, and that's, that, and I think, that's something that, I know we've all, received, Charles Gruska's, email, about, assessments and regional agreements. So there's some that are thinking maybe there's other things that we could do. But I think there was I think, look at the language, I think there was, support for the language that we're moving forward now.
Okay. Tina, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I mean, I took a nice page of notes. I thought it was a really thoughtful dialogue, and I really appreciated Peter, the new chair of the Chatham Select Board, being there, and then Mary Anderson, the newest Select Board member from Harwich. Both asked really thoughtful questions, and I really appreciated that. And it was clear, just in this dialogue that we had, that Chatham, or at least a couple of folks, just needed some more time, I think, to digest a little bit about the assessment, whatever we decide to do. And then Harwich clearly, as both of you have stated, had a concern, because we're talking about elementary schools right now, but they did raise the concern at some point that moves to the middle school and to the high school. So there was a little bit of conversation, just a visionary conversation. But, and then, of course, I guess we'll have to talk about, because we have talked about the upper-lower proposal, there were some questions about how that would work. So anyway, it was a very thoughtful conversation, probably one of our best ones, I think. So it was really good.
Okay.
Yep.
I think there was a lot of questions, a lot of forward thinking. That people were thinking, well, if we do this, what's going to happen in 5 years? And, so much so that when we got towards the end of the meeting, we ultimately were looking for direction. So, Tina and Terry and I and Scott were looking for, what do we bring back to the school committee as what are you guys looking for direction for us to take? Do you want us to start looking towards the future and make huge overhaul changes, or is this a good place to start? And ultimately, it was kind of a consensus of the work group that what Scott presented was a good place to start with our change. And so what we said is that, or what I said was that we were going to bring back that information to our committee, and then at this meeting discuss what we think of what Scott's changes, because it was overload last meeting to get all of that information on that regional agreement. So at this meeting, kind of discuss those potential changes, and if we think it's something that we could move forward with. And, I said that it's possible that we talk about it this meeting, and we could potentially vote at our next meeting regarding regional agreement changes. It's the next thing that we're going to talk about in our agenda. But so the select boards are looking for us to do something, whether we want to take this and push it forward or if we want to do something else. But they're looking for us to take a step and say, this is what we think we should do. So, and we did actually ask, back to the subcommittee list, that they do feel that the work group is a valuable place to have. So we are going to maintain that, and we're going to leave the 4 of us on there that were on there. So Tina, Joe, myself, and Terry, to continue that dialogue with the 2 select boards and the town manager administrators. It's very bizarre having a select board, a board of selectmen, and a town administrator and a town manager. So the townspeople. So I think that they felt that it was a valuable thing. They enjoyed the dialogue as well to be able to continue it going forward. So that's our summary of the meeting. Tina, go ahead.
And just one other comment that I thought was interesting, and I appreciated that both select board members recognized this, is that we probably, when we get to whatever we are going to get to, that both select boards, we need to have another joint meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think it does we start playing ping pong, when one's over here and one's there. So there was consensus that a joint meeting, once we're ready to go forward, would be beneficial.
Does anybody who wasn't there have any questions regarding that topic? Okay, so I think that is a nice dovetail into our next item of business, which is the revised regional agreement language. So on that, that is basically the document that Scott presented at our last meeting, not basically, it is the document that was presented at our last meeting. This was presented to the work group, and they seemed pretty pleased with it. They seemed like they appreciated the work that went into it to tie it to our district versus taking Mount Greylock, and recognize that it's not going to be a permanent fix, and it's not meant to be. We don't think it should be. So looking to see what the committee feels is the right way to go with this proposed change, and any questions and any conversation or anything to go along with it do we want to bring it for a vote at our next meeting? I mean, I feel a little awkward that we're missing 3 of our members tonight. You know, we do have a quorum, so I should make sure I say that publicly, that we are in quorum. But we do have 3 members absent. So I'm a little hesitant to make this our first read, but I feel like this is our second first read, because we did do it at our last meeting. And I feel like nothing has changed from our last meeting. Scott, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just, so nothing has changed. The color-coded document is the same document that we had last time. The only thing that we've done is Mark Terry, the district's attorney, has taken every one of the color-coded things in the document and incorporated them into our working red line, so that this ties out to the 2 documents work together. There are sort of an explanation of any change in the red line, but the color-coded ones are the new ones that have been incorporated into this. For clarity, for the 3 people that might be watching out there and at home, specifically, this does not touch in any way, shape, or form the clause in Section 5, location and ownership of schools, that states, there shall be no less than 1 elementary school in each member town. Students in the elementary grade shall attend the schools in their residence, except in special cases as defined by the school committee. So the existing language in the document that talks about both towns will have an elementary school and the kids in those towns will go to those elementary schools, we're not touching that at all. I think that, I think there was some concerns that was going to be touched. That's not being touched. And the other thing to keep in mind is that while we have had conversations about would an upper and lower elementary school be more educationally viable or better for kids, the assessment approach taken here is one that addresses the current means of having an elementary school in both towns. So in the future, looking out there off into the future, if the towns and school committees decide to have upper and lower schools, there would need to be a different assessment technique than what is in this document. So this document is, the color-coded additions are really meant to provide fiscal equity to the elementary configuration that we currently have. And I think, the working group can also acknowledge that there are conversations that need to be had looking forward, but this can go address what we all know is some fiscal inequities. And I think the folks the folks that have been part of these conversations from Chatham can see and understand that there is, Harwich taxpayers are picking up some of the bill for what happens at Chatham Elementary School just by virtue of it being small. So along that lines, there was also a request at the last school committee meeting for me to do some research on the Mount Greylock So I had a good conversation today with Superintendent Jake McCandless, who's the superintendent at Mount Greylock, and one of his school committee members, Joe Bergeron, who they refer to as the chief architect of the Mount Greylock assessment approach. So to give some context to that school district and how they're similar and how their situation was when they were doing this a little bit different than ours. They are similar in that they have two communities, and there is we'll call it maybe a wealth factor difference between the two communities, where what's different there is that the larger of the communities, which is Williamstown, is the one that has more fiscal means. The smaller of the communities, Lanesboro, has slightly less fiscal means. Lanesboro has a very small elementary school, like the size of Chatham's. It's only about 150 students at Lanesboro Elementary School. Williamstown's elementary school is over twice as large. Where they differ from our current position is we are already fully regionalized and are looking at revising our regional agreement and providing fiscal equity. They went into this conversation sort of from a Nauset system where they were three separate school committees. You had an elementary school in each town that had a school committee, and you had they were regionalized only at the upper grade levels. So they were looking at this, how do we go bring it together? Because they could see when they were forming that region that it cost much more in terms of per pupil costs to run that small elementary school than it did to run the big one. In fact, their calculation was it was about 15 to 20% more expensive to run the small building than the big building, and wanted to make sure that that was being addressed in the calculus. But they also wanted to make sure that they were taking into consideration how the revenues that you're getting from the state through Chapter 78, that's being divvied up appropriately. So there was some pretty advanced math that went in there, because they could look back at the last 30 years of Chapter 70 aid that Lanesboro was getting for its elementary school, and the last 30 years that Williamstown was getting for its elementary school, and quite literally did regression analysis and came up with, here's how we should look at minimum required contribution and population. So there's some advanced math at the back end of how that equation works. We can't do that. And this is why we can't. Because once you regionalize, the state does not give you Chapter 70 aid by town. It gives you Chapter 70 aid by a region. So we can't look at the last 10 years and see what's Harwich's Chapter 70 and Chatham's, because it doesn't exist. It's just Monomoy. And it probably doesn't make sense to go back to do a regression analysis off of stuff that happened a decade ago and go 40 years back that way. So what we have done in this, when Michael and I were talking about it, is to take that Chapter 70 aid and to split it equitably amongst the cost centers, let's call them, the two elementary schools, and then the middle school district, the middle school, high school, and central office costs as sort of these three cost center pockets, and split it by the enrollment in the student enrollment in each of those. So it's a simplistic way to do it, but I think it's a fair way to break out that money. We do the exact same thing with revenue that's coming in when it comes to school choice revenue that's coming in from other towns into the district, and sort of explain that to the working group. And I thought that there was good buy-in from everyone that's an equitable way to go about this, and I think there are some voices that we heard at the table that would want to continue having conversations, looking forward much the same way that Joe Bergeron was looking at it. And if we're looking out into the future of Monomoy, what should we be doing in terms of this? But I think the consensus was that adopting these and having the school committee move this forward to the boards of selectmen, have me present to the boards of the selectmen, would put us on track for moving this forward, ideally for town meetings in the fall. The question that I got from Mark Terry, and he would love some, our district's lawyer, he would like some guidance too from the group, is should we send the redlined version preemptively to DESI to start getting feedback, because that becomes a limiting factor, because ultimately our committee is going to take a vote. The select boards are going to take, would be taking votes, but at some point we also need to get feedback from DESI. We actually already have, that's what the blue in the document is, and we know that we're using a method that DESI has recently approved. Coincidentally, in the conversations that I have had with Mount Greylock, they were saying that at least 5 other school districts have reached out to them recently. Did DESI mention that? No. And that one is very actively on their end pursuing a change very similar to what we're suggesting for the exact same reasons. So we're following a method that is, I think that DESI has already given us feedback on the meat and potatoes of the previous changes. The fiscal piece that we're moving forward to them is, at least it's centered on something that they've approved in the last 4 years. So hopefully that will sort of grease the skids and have us on a timeline, should our committee vote on it in August, to have us ready to be past all the boards in time.
That's very interesting.
It is interesting.
Even more interesting that more people are looking at it as well. So my question would be about putting it to sending it to DESI. We wouldn't do that prior to us taking a vote. We would wait till after taking a vote, or we would do it prior to taking the vote, and then if the vote passes, we're in good shape, but if the vote fails, we rescind our request?
Yeah, it just gets us in line.
Okay.
To have
So we
somebody
could take
review.
a consensus vote on whether or not it would be a good idea to go ahead and send it to DESI in advance of our vote. Our next meeting, Tina, I believe you said August 11th?
Yep.
You had that in your head, so
I have it in my head.
Okay, so August 11th is when the next meeting would be, and that would be the meeting that we would presumably vote on it if we feel that we're in that position. So, any questions for Scott, Mr. Osceola?
More for the committee, is that appropriate at this time?
I would say yes.
Okay. And I've remembered to unmute, which is a learned skill after a year and a half or so. I'm not going to be able to get past the first page tonight on things. But first, I share the chair's concern about the makeup of our meeting tonight. In the absence of 3 of our comrades does weigh on me a little bit. I think it would be beneficial to have the opportunity to hear from a newest member who brings fresh eyes to this. In the absence, is certainly not desirable. And then 2 of the members not present were foundational members of the committee, and the experience that's embodied there is something we would desire to hear. So if I'd have no problem at all if we can to keep this on the table for a meeting longer, if we could do so. I think it could be valuable to us. Okay.
May I clarify?
Yes,
Are you saying, so we're not voting tonight? So
Correct.
you're saying not vote at the next meeting as well, push it off to the second meeting in August? Is that what, I just want to make sure I understand your,
yes.
okay,
Assuming we have greater numbers present in August 11th.
Okay.
We have an opportunity for a fuller discussion, and also to digest the substance of changes which are pretty significant, and some that haven't been thought of, because that haven't been mentioned yet, which I'd like to introduce.
okay.
One of them is just a minor point. Well, maybe not a minor point. We have an opportunity to think about how we want to consider weighted voting in subcommittees. The agreement, the regional agreement doesn't address that specifically. It talks about voting in terms of the large committees. That there's a potential problem in subcommittees when they say that a majority vote must have at least one committee member from each of the two-member towns. That becomes more problematic when there's only 4 people. So, for example, as the minutes show, when we were doing a discussion in the Superintendent Evaluation Committee, a vote was split. 2 members said one thing, 2 members said something different. The 2 members were divided by town, so we didn't have an opportunity to have someone from the other town because there's just too few people. So how exactly do we handle this? Well, we had a sort of a constitutional crisis. It was about 6:23 in the evening, right before a school committee meeting at 6:30. So I made the executive decision to follow this as much as I could. In a 2-2 vote, I said that should be 2-1, that the Harwich folks should be 1 vote and the Chatham folks should be half a vote, so that I'd make a proposal to the full committee on the basis of a 2-1 vote. Yet, a few sentences in the regional agreement would clarify that. I think what I did is in the spirit of it. I think it's consistent with what we're supposed to do. I don't know if that's what other committee chairs are doing, so we should not have variation on this in terms of voting. We should take an opportunity to clarify, how do we want subcommittee votes to be apportioned. It might be a very easy thing, but let's just make it clear about what's there, and so we don't have other problems. Speaking of problems, I see a problem with weighted voting in the Department of Education. The original document was trying to say, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I think it's pretty clear. The original document was trying to say, let's make sure that the larger town doesn't steamroll the smaller town, right? So you don't have Harwich. If the Harwich members agree on something, they're 4 votes. If the Chatham members all disagree, they're 2 votes. We don't want 4-2 to determine some big issues. We want to have a vote from somebody in each town, and that'll be a kind of a speed bump or a break, or choose your metaphor, that'll slow things down a bit or prevent things, so that there's an opportunity for more discussion and better agreement, so that one town just doesn't dominate the other town. That was the basis for the agreement. So far, so good? Okay. Desi says no. That additional provision violates a fundamental concept of one person, one vote. And Desi is suggesting you have to remove that impediment in order to be more fully democratic. The spirit of that is commendable. However, it runs counter to another set of rules and regulations that Desi didn't consider. That is, the Attorney General and open meeting law. Now, as you know, things are supposed to be done in public. We're supposed to be conversing in public. All the public bodies need to conduct their business publicly. Deliberations must be in public. But these two laws haven't joined. They don't neatly align. So, do you see the problem? What's prevented? What's a deliberation? Well, it's a discussion, written or oral, amongst a quorum. What's a quorum in Monomoy? 5 people. What's the Harwich vote? 4 people. What is a vote that, if the rule of eliminating the half vote from Chatham, what is a majority vote now? 4 votes. Potentially, Harwich can have 4 votes. Chatham, if they were grouped, could have 2 votes. It would be 4-2. Now, here's where it gets tricky. What is there to prevent a Harwich pre-meet at 6 o'clock prior to the school committee meeting, where 4 people get together and discuss how they will vote as a block in the school committee meeting? It's not a quorum. It's not 5 people. Fewer than a quorum can discuss between themselves or even among, if it's not a quorum. Now, there are safeguards, right? You don't send out an email because you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know who's going to forward it. But that issue doesn't apply. You just have 4 people at a table in the back. They're all from Harwich. They discuss what they're going to do, how they're going to vote. They're not violating anything. And yet, the effect is to undermine the core foundations of democratic functioning of a school committee. 4 people come in as a block, they vote as a block, the other town is steamrollered. It's perfectly legal. And yet, it violates the spirit or the intent of both the Attorney General and Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It's not what they're intending, but when you take these two, principles of functioning, and you put them together, they don't align neatly or perfectly, and they allow for some real problems. Let me just limit it to that point, some real problems. Could that happen? Would that happen? Of course it could. Of course it would. That's why there are rules. We don't just trust to the better nature of human beings. If you could just trust to that, there wouldn't be any need for rules at all. So that's an issue that I think we have to consider and perhaps take up with Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, since they're initiating these changes. The removal of that extra step, having a vote from the other town, that is in this instance Chatham, that could be an issue for us if we could try to prevent it. Even if it gives the appearance of being anti-democratic, it might help us be more democratic in the long run. So, now, here's sort of what I'm hoping. I hope I've completely misunderstood this situation, and if I have, I'll be like Rosanna Dana, and you know what she says.
That was good. That was good. Scott, you pointed.
Just 2 points. First, Joe, I want to assure you that it doesn't completely take away that premise of there must be a vote in the affirmative from one of the member towns. Under the weighted voting clause, there's this. It says unless otherwise required by law or regulation. So that's how we sort of solve this. There are certain things that by law or regulation require simple majority votes or simple 2/3 votes. So in those cases, the rest of our language is superseded by state statute. And, so if state statute, and I think what Mark Terry was saying, our district attorney is saying, that the district's budget, which is a huge, big thing that the school committee is responsible for, so it's that simple majority that needs to approve that budget, and that's specified by statute, that in that case, we can't go and have language in our agreement that runs against the concept of one person, one vote, which is how they've kind of, that the weighted voting that's there is to sort of preserve this concept of one person, one vote, but we can't have we can't have something in our regional agreement supersede state statute, is what the attorney is doing. I'll just raise a worry I have, and I definitely hear and I understand the subcommittee point that you're bringing up, Joe, and I want to emphasize that there is what I see out there in terms of the political tea leaves is that there's some urgency to us discussing and moving something forward, if we're going to move something forward, and if that means us giving up one other night and scheduling an additional school committee meeting so that we can be on a timeline that doesn't have us, because I think if we punt this and we're not going to have a first read into September, and then it becomes the end of, the end of August, first read's in the middle of August, second read's the end of August, that means it's not going to the select boards until September for town meetings that they were thinking were going to be in, I worry that we have that political thing. I think the select boards are hoping that I'm going to them with here's what our committee has moved forward to you, or that I'm giving them a report, or the chair is giving a report saying, we've decided that we're not going to be moving something forward. But I think there's an expectation that came out of that working group that there's going to be forward movement. And I worry that, we need to do everything we can to at least meet that expectation out there. And that's where I do worry that if we have to wrestle with subcommittee language, is that going to then get in the way? I think we can address subcommittee language and potentially even address it by policy if we need in the short term to get us to a point that we're moving things forward.
Tina and then Jackie.
Yeah. And I echo what Scott said, because that's my number one concern. Being in the work group, but if we want this to get on the fall, I don't think we can wait until the 25th. And the only thing I would say is at the last meeting, we did, or at least I did, had the understanding that this was coming up for a possible vote. So in my mind, I expected that this, I expected to vote, and then I knew we pushed it off, which was fine. And I would hope other school committee members might have that same understanding, because I understand people have to be absent, that's fine, but we also have an obligation to follow the timelines and things that we've committed to. So I don't want to speak for Terry, but Terry was a member of the working group, and I think he probably understands this. Sharon and Danielle, I don't know how much they've read this, so, but yeah, I'm very concerned about timing.
Okay. Thank you, Tina. Jackie?
I just need some clarification. So this document was supposed to be a first read, and now we're talking about moving it out to be a first read at our next meeting, which is August 11th.
That's Joe's suggestion, yes.
That's Joe's suggestion, okay. At which point there would be an opportunity to then discuss the weighted vote conversation that Joe just shared with us, which to me interpreted more than just about the subcommittees, but about the weighted vote portion of this document. Is that correct, Joe? Okay. So it's not simply just the subcommittee piece. My opinion, the weighted vote portion of this document is a very big piece of this very important document that we have forever been editing since I've been on the committee. And I also do agree with Tina that, you know, we can't just, we have an obligation to move forward with these, with our job, whether folks are here or not. This particular document, I don't want to move forward based on a timeline solely, because I'm not going to be naive that it is not a huge driver in this document, because we all know how it works. Again, been there for a while. But I do see the value in the issues that have been brought to our attention tonight and sharing that with the fellow members. I too, Tina, was, you know, aware that this was the document that was being presented, but I would not be honest if I didn't say what Mr. Osceola has presented is a great conversation point and something that we should as a committee explore further, and others have an opportunity to question it. That being said, I'm kind of between moving it out for another reading, the first reading on August 11th, or voting it and having a second reading on the 11th, because that would still allow conversation that was had tonight to happen again, and an opportunity for folks to read it more, think about what Joe said tonight, watch the meeting if they weren't here, to be able to talk about what has been discussed here tonight, and then we could then at that point move forward, or we would have more edits, much like the policy subcommittee had frequently. So that's just kind of I'm not sure if that helps or hinders, but I can see both ways. But I guess my point is that I wanted to express that the second reading is also an opportunity to have the same concerns and share that with a full committee when they're here. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end-all be-all for the document. So,
Tina?
Yeah, and I would agree with what both Jackie and Joe said. There's a lot more than just the Mountain Greylock thing here, and I totally get that. In fact, I noticed something where did I mark it? Where it said that we have to, by ballot, elect our chair and vice chair. That's new. I mean, there are some things in here that are new, and I would agree with Jackie's comment that, yeah, there's a lot to digest, and we do need to take our time. And we are up against a timeline, and I don't know if there's a way to separate these two things out. I'm not sure. I don't know. Because I think we have two issues here.
Yeah, I think we do. We couldn't tell if you were out of the corner of my eye.
I was thinking about the fact that maybe there should be more conversation, but not thinking about the fact that even if we had it as a second read, there still could be discussion, so.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is that if this is considered our first read and we have it on the agenda at our next meeting and decide not to vote on it, or it fails a vote. So that's always a potential. Go ahead.
And just a question for Scott. So if we were to want to share this with DESE, we're asking for feedback, correct? It's not approval, it's for feedback?
Right, technically the approval comes from the commissioner after everything's passed, but you want to make sure that you're going to be having a vote or having a document that goes before town meetings, that town meetings are passing, that's one that DESE has bought into and won't after the fact say, hey, great job selling it to two towns and getting them to vote, but we don't agree with the document. So, so we have run it by, as the committee has suggested changes, we've been running them by and been getting feedback and incorporating, so it's incorporated into this. And, I would say the most substantive change is that section on assessment.
Right.
And it's, do we want to send it to DESE to go and say, hey, look at this, here's a big change that you haven't seen before. look at the assessment, and are you going to be okay with this? Oh, by the way, we're following something that you approved recently.
Right. So it would just be for feedback, it's not submitting it. So it would just be for more information for us to refine this even further.
Presumably, it would come back with some minor
Right.
alterations, but nothing major.
Okay.
Kind of like a policy would be,
Fingers crossed.
well, yeah, presumably, because if that happens, then we'd have to revote it, and then it would have to go
Right.
back to the select boards as well. Does that help?
Yes.
Jackie?
The more I think about it, ironically, the reason which Joe provided for maybe wanting to move this out to a first reading on August 11th is exactly the reason we're having an issue with weighted voting. And it puts Chatham at a it puts Chatham at at a disadvantage, almost, to push it forward without discussing the weighted voting for purely the weighted voting, the way it works. Do y'all follow?
Yep.
Say that again for me.
Yeah, I got it. I got it.
I know, it was Tina's onto it.
I'm on to it.
Tina, say that again for us.
Well, purely the issue with the weighted voting is exactly why we should move it out and have a full committee here. Because if all four Harwich members, if they vote to not want to change the weighted voting, it doesn't matter if all four Chatham members vote they do want to change it. So we really do need to have a full committee to make a decision regarding the weighted voting with the hopes or with the not hopes, however you feel, that one Harwich member is going to vote to change the weighted voting. Because that's the only way we're going to change it. Am I correct?
Well,
Need two Harwich members.
Excuse
Yeah.
me, we need two.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
need two in order to even change it, which is one,
No,
two.
no, this
Which
is
to
a
me
clarity
seems
thing.
even
Yeah.
more that we need to have a full committee to discuss the weighted voting.
Right. I think Scott and I are going to say the same thing, but go ahead.
I'm not sure, so you put
Go
your
ahead,
finger
Scott.
first.
My clarity finger would be this, is,
If you give me a clarifying issue
so-
again, we're beyond that.
so, even if we didn't add the wording, and I would call it a clarifying statement that says unless otherwise required by law or regulation, it's a clarifying statement affirming the law. So basically, when it comes to certain things in the statute, weighted voting, or the requirement of one person from each town is out the window for those. So the committee could go and decide that they don't want to change that clause, but when it comes to those issues that are statutorily required,
We wouldn't have a choice.
you wouldn't have a choice. Or if the committee decided to go and uphold the language, but somebody on the committee or somebody on the public questioned a vote that the committee took, so like you went and didn't approve a budget or did approve a budget, or let's say you didn't approve a budget because somebody from the other town said no, that could be questioned, taken to court, and we would not prevail because we would have done something as a body violating state law.
That is not clear to me. Someone else
Tina.
reword it.
Well, oh, I'm sorry, Jackie, I think Jackie
No,
was
she
speaking.
said somebody else
No, I-
reword it.
Oh,
Yeah.
So if you have a better way to explain that, you can
I-
explain it to Jackie.
well, it,
Because I don't know sure I could explain it. I understand
at
it. but-
one of our workshops, and I can't remember, did we have two last year? I can't seem to recall. But at one of our workshops, we had Mark Terry there. I don't know if everybody remembers. And this was a question he had to clarify, is how our weighted voting was set up. And we had this discussion that there were, as Scott said, there are certain things like the budget where we have to have, it doesn't matter if 4 Harwich people, we have to have one Chatham person. There are certain things that are mandated, I guess by the state or whatever, that we have to have a cross person of the town. And then there are other things where, yeah, Harwich could vote, boom, and there we go. So there are some different things, but Mark Terry, when he was at our workshop, did ask about this, because he needed to clarify it for himself, for his understanding.
It's actually the reverse.
Oh,
Reverse.
did I
Yeah.
mix it?
So the state has things that don't require one person from each town. They just require
Okay,
simple
so it's
majority.
reversed. Yeah, it's
So
reversed.
think of it, Jack, at town meeting. Some votes require 2/3, and other votes require simple majority. Doesn't matter who votes for what.
Right.
The simple majority is a simple majority. And, Bill Litchfield can say, I declare it a simple majority. But with the 2/3, he has to be a lot more cautious because there's certain laws that he has to follow. So there's certain laws that we have to follow that have to be, if it's a simple majority, it has to be a simple majority. It can't be dependent.
So in this case, the regional agreement, when we're voting it, which one is it?
I don't know. I think it's a 2/3.
Oh, for the regional agreement?
To approve the regional agreement,
That is a good
I
question.
think it's 2/3, but I could be, well, actually, it might be in here.
Which it takes
Yeah.
into account the weighted vote.
Yes.
Yes, which I think is my point. My point is, in order to change the weighted vote, like say hypothetically, in order to change the weighted vote, we vote with the weighted votes, which hypothetically, if Harwich was like, no, we like it the way it is, just for this reason exactly, all four would vote against the change, and then it would remain the same, because Chatham wouldn't have enough votes.
No, because the simple majority, no, I had it
Which
backwards. The simple majority is a simple majority. Doesn't matter who's from where. Simple majority is simple
Right,
majority.
but you just said 2/3.
And this,
If it's
this isn't touching the weighted voting. This only.
Touches
so
the simple
this-
majority.
Right, this
So-
only touches the clause, so the weighted
Well,
voting
it's
doesn't
titled
change.
weighted voting.
Yeah, but the weighted voting, Harwich is still it's still one vote and a half vote for Chatham members. That hasn't changed. It's just clarifying that under certain statutory things, like borrowing or the budget, that the concept of one person, one vote, and that that you can't have a member from one town or the other hijack the process. The piece where there has to be a member from each town, that goes away when you have those certain statutory things. But when it comes to a new English curriculum, or all of those things that that aren't dictated by statute, those you're still going to need somebody from Harwich and somebody from Chatham to approve it in order for it to pass.
I think Joe was first, then Tina, then Meredith.
So we need more clarification with unless otherwise required by law or regulation, and this is where you send out the bat signal for the attorney, I guess, to see exactly what this means. And there's possible reason to slow this down, even though the select board might wish otherwise. But, for instance, we looked at subcommittee assignments tonight. Now, our procedure is that the chair has the right to appoint people to subcommittees, subject to the approval of the committee as a whole, right? Okay. Hypothetically, Harwich decides they have an interest in determining subcommittee assignments. So Harwich has a school committee pre-meet amongst the four, and they say, this is our slate for the subcommittee assignments. They can do that because a discussion among the four is not a quorum, but it would have the effect of determining in a closed session what the school committee vote would be, because the people in Chatham are not sufficient to lock that vote. It's not the intention of DESI to have that kind of situation. They're trying to be more democratic. But our democratic function is not determined solely by DESI. It's also determined by the Attorney General's office and state law. And as I said earlier, the two do not align perfectly. There's some mismatches. And in those crevice of mismatch, there's a phrase. In that mismatch, there is an opportunity for political activity that would, in effect, undermine democratic functioning of a school committee. Would people ever do such a thing? Of course they would. Of course they would. National level, state level, what have you. It's how people operate in politics, and small-town politics is no better than political functioning anywhere else. Sometimes the narcissism of petty difference makes things even much, much worse. And if our microphones were off and we had a drink somewhere, we could probably all come up with stories. So, that's not an invitation. So I would at least like to get from our attorney clarification on, unless otherwise required by law or regulation, what exactly are we talking about? Lay this out in specifics, what's referred to. I took, for example, that the budget was separate. I was assuming that from the outset. But there's a lot of other important things we do that are not budget or incurring debt and so forth. A big part of what we do is policy, for example. To some extent, that's done by state law, but we've had debates and discussion on policy issues. If that were to be done by town, wow, that would terribly undermine our work. And the whole intention is to be as transparent and democratic as possible. And I fear that the mashing up of DESI and Attorney General is not always aligning to the goals that both actually have and which we share, which is as democratic and open as possible.
I don't remember what I said. I think Tina, then Meredith, or is it? Go ahead, Tina.
Okay, so I'm having flashbacks of the policy subcommittee, because this kind of thing is what got us spun up a lot, and I know that we have members on this committee that like to have every scenario in writing, because you never know when it will come up, which is kind of what we're talking about now. So I think my question, certainly we need the reasons from the attorney. I think that's good. I'm also sitting here wondering, in all fairness, if we shouldn't just have a blanket weighted voting, and because it seems so confusing to remember when we can do it this way and when can we do it this way, and should we be thinking about just having a blanket, this is the way it is, meaning that we always have to have this one guaranteed crossover, whatever, of setting it up in a way that we don't have to worry about, what is this applying to. So that's my one thing there. And my other comment, the only thing that I would anticipate, and I don't really want to, I also wonder at what point we might get an argument from a particular town, because if you read here, should a shift in the respective populations of the member towns, blah, 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 I wonder at what point we'll have a town say, well, wait a second. If this is the way it's going, we want 6 members because we have more of the population and we pay more of the bill. So, I don't know. I think we probably need to think.
Same thought.
Yeah, we need to be thinking on a bigger scale what is best for the whole thing, I think. Yeah.
Meredith?
So, as far as voting for the regional agreement, the weighted vote is in writing in the document, and it's 3/4, not 2/3, which means no fewer than 4.5 votes. If there were page numbers, I would tell you where it was. But,
Oh, yes, tell us, please.
it's section
Go, Mary.
16?
You need your Roman numeral.
I hope I'm
Whoa,
right.
5, 6, 7, 10's an X.
And then it further, which I think starts to talk about what you just brought up, is that if that,
Amendments?
it's the amendments, yes.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So it's,
Getting there.
so
Bottom
as
up.
far as voting for the region, or amending the regional agreement, which is what we're attempting to do, correct?
Yes, thank you. We are.
So it would be a 3/4 vote, which no fewer than 4.5 votes, which means Harwich could not, what did you say, snowball Chatham? Plow over Chatham, something. Steamroll.
Yeah.
By
Snowplow,
By
yeah.
0.5, by one person.
So one
But
person
still, but it would
has
still
to-
have to,
Yeah.
like, we still couldn't just,
I understand so
I'm not saying
Joe's,
right.
Joe was making the comment of 4 Harwich members could get together and decide what their vote is gonna be. This is saying it has to be at least 5 votes. 4 Harwich and 1 Chatham would be the minimum it would require. And therefore, it couldn't do Joe's scenario of pre-planning legally because it's not a quorum.
right.
I think that's what you were getting at. Okay, now go ahead.
And then it further, states that, or by a petition signed by 10-member town registered voters. But then the section B, no such amendment shall be made which shall substantially impair the rights of the holders of any of the district's bonds or notes of the district then outstanding are the rights of the district to procure the means of payment thereof. So, I don't know, I think that helps what we're talking about. It doesn't?
Well, it clarifies that 4 members of Harwich, and then you need just 1 person from Chatham to make the, let's just say hypothetically, it stay the way it is.
Yeah.
But if Chatham was like, no, we don't want to do it this way anymore, it's gonna take all 4 Chatham members plus 2 Harwich members to get your, right?
So you'd need
Am I doing my
5
math?
votes. You'd need 5 votes. 1, 2,
Oh, yeah.
3
so I-
Harwich members.
I need 3 Harwich members and all 4 Chatham members to vote to change the weighted votes, which is exactly the problem I think that Joe's trying to get to, without speaking for him, but, I mean, Chatham can't even overturn the way this is written, because it's not in the best interest of Harwich. Excuse me, well, if you were to change it, it probably wouldn't be in the best interest of Harwich. It has worked thus far, but technically, it's not in the best interest of Chatham. It depends how you look at it.
Right.
But the weighted vote alone can't get outvoted. We could never do it unless our members of Harwich were like, sure, let's change it. And I'm sure our selectmen in Harwich would love that. We understanding what I'm saying now?
Scott, you saw your clarifying finger.
So, so our lawyer did, after we had our discussion on this, when we last brought this up in discussion, it would have been in October of 2020, sent us examples of
Yeah.
when when statute says we have to do
Ton.
this. Adoption of budget, which requires 2/3 vote. So it's basically saying that, that you would have to have a 2/3 vote, not, that you could vote a budget and have nobody from Chatham agree with it, just by statute. The adoption of the stabilization fund is another one that shows up. And then one that we can all appreciate, that there are provisions under open meeting law that require majority votes, like to go into executive session. And you can't have the folks from Chatham decide that they don't want to go into executive session. But there are also other things that are required that school committees vote on that Mark shared with us. For instance, we vote each year on, are we going to be part of school choice or not? So it's required to vote on that. there is no requirement in the statute that it, that it be a majority, so there's nothing that's dictating it, so this wouldn't apply there. It applies, it applies wherever the states, or the statute or regulations are specifically saying majorities or 2/3. Clear as mud.
Joe?
Pudding.
Some of the weighted voting issue is not hypothetical. We've already had experience with it, and we've had actually rather difficult and even heated. I remember the emotions were pretty strongly felt by some of us. I'm referring, for instance, to whether we should have 2 rounds or not for community participation or the public comment. Initially, one of the members from Harwich suggested adding a second round of public comment. And we discussed that, and it went back and forth. And it turned out that 4 people from Harwich favored a second round of comment. 4 people from Chatham opposed a second round of comment. Wow, okay, but you need to have that Chatham, you need that 0.5 person. So the initiative would be 4-2, and the majority of 4-2 would fail because it didn't have 4.5. It didn't have the other person. And I had spoken as best I could about why we shouldn't have a second round, and I convinced nobody. So I said one thing and I voted another way, simply because a 4-2 majority seemed to me should not fail on an issue that was not really town-related. At least I didn't think it was town-related. I didn't see a secret agenda of a second round of discussion favoring Harwich more than Chatham, right? The idea was the 0.5 was supposed to be the impediment to make sure that Chatham doesn't get steamrollered, but it's a non-Harwich Chatham issue, but the rule still applies, so 4-2 loses. That didn't seem to make sense to me. Oh, and then the next meeting was going to open up the budget, so let's go into the budget discussions with a bad taste in our mouth. What a great idea. So I changed my vote, and I voted for the second round of discussion. So the weighted voting actually has impacted us. And some problems have been avoided, I think, perhaps because other people may have done what I did. However, if you really wanted to, I suppose Harwich could convene a meeting to decide to reopen the issue of second round of discussion, and they could discuss it behind the back of the public, present it here, and then it would essentially be rubber stamping. And that's what the law is supposed to prevent. That's what we hope to prevent. That's what Department of Education hopes to prevent. So all I'm saying is that the issues here, I'm sorry for the cliche, the devil in the details. There are details we need to think of more clearly and have a better understanding of. I appreciate Dr. Carpenter's clarifications. But some of these issues are still there. I still think it's a good idea to place the bat signal for our attorney for further discussion on this. I'd love to hear the people who are not here to have a chance to weigh in on this. I would suggest we're not going to resolve this tonight, and that's fine. I don't think we can just resolve it. It's okay if we don't. some things may be, by the way, very simple. The weighted voting in subcommittees may be a 5-minute, we may decide that very quickly, it may not be. But, we could stop here. I at least promise to speak no more on this to help to that point, since I think I've taken up more airtime than anybody. But we could just say, okay, we've had an initial airing of these issues, pause here, wait till we regroup next time, perhaps bring in other voices, and in between, hopefully we get more, if the chair agrees, and maybe we can get more clarification from our attorney. If not, we'll work on our own resources, but we can just stop and continue the conversation at a future meeting.
So, hearing you say that, and then also processing where this actually came from, and where the charge from the work group came from, and what they're actually looking for us to do. And then also thinking of the regional agreement as, I honestly, I look at it as a living document. I don't look at it as a permanent document, because it can't be, right? It has to be reviewed every 5 years, and things change, and therefore things have to change. There is an amendment process. Even the last line of the weighted voting, it says the committee will act to address the disparity via the amendment process. So there is an amendment process out there. This language that we've been using for weighted voting has been here for 9.5 years. It was approved in December of 2010. So it's been alive and been there and been used for almost 10 years, because the committee started in July of 2011. So while I very much appreciate the thought behind it and the concern behind it, I think that it has served, I would say served well for the past 10 years. I've been on the committee for 10 years, and I don't really feel like for the past 10 years there has been a question of the weighted voting for many issues. I don't remember, although my memory is starting to fade a little bit on parts, so maybe I'm remembering all the highlights. I don't know. Therefore, what my thought is, and what I would suggest, is that we're not changing the weighted voting section. We're adding what DESI recommended, because whether or not we put it in there, we still have to follow state statute. Like Dr. Carpenter said, if we decide that we don't want to deal with a vote that isn't approved by 2/3 only, and we decide we want to deal with weighted voting, it could be taken to court and gets overturned, and it doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter if we put that line in there or not. I think it's helpful for clarification. But we're not substantially changing anything in the weighted voting section. If it's something that the committee wants to do more research into, I don't think voting on a amended regional agreement, taking it to the select boards, pushing it forward for the situation that we're looking at dealing with now, which is why this whole thing came up recently. I mean, it's come up every year for many, 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 many years. But this whole reason that we're trying to push it forward is because the towns are requesting it for financial reasons. That is not to say we can't spend the next 6 months looking at the weighted voting section. The subcommittee thing, I think, is extremely important. I don't think it belongs in the regional agreement. I think that's actually a policy. That's where, because there's no subcommittees mentioned in the regional agreement. I think that's a policy decision. So I think that, ding, we're going to send that to policy now to start looking at subcommittees and weighted voting, and also constitution of the subcommittee. It's the desire to have a balanced subcommittee, that should be in a policy. So I think that looking at the weighted voting is a very valuable endeavor, and we're not changing it now and therefore waiting until Springtown meeting. So we have this, we're going to look to make the change for the financial assessment aspect because the towns are asking us to. We are voting to make that change in the regional agreement, pass it along to the towns for potential fall town meetings, and at that same time, we're looking at an amendment to update Section 1, Part B regarding weighted voting, and it comes back to a Springtown meeting. There's no reason why that can't happen. I don't think pushing off the financial aspects is beneficial to take the time to do the research on weighted voting. That's my opinion. That's where I'm looking at it. I think that we can put it on the agenda for the next meeting with a potential vote. We can vote on it or not vote on it at the next meeting when the rest of the committee is here. I can say that for me, I was at the last meeting. I was able to review the information that Scott presented. I was at the work group, so I actually had a second presentation as well. But I came to this meeting ready with questions. I didn't have any questions regarding it because I was a part of other conversations, but I felt that I wasn't ready to vote on anything today because I think we needed to digest it and have more conversation about it, which is why the vote is set for the next meeting, which regardless, I don't think we would have voted tonight anyways with only 5 of us. But I think that putting it on the agenda for the August 11th meeting with a potential vote, and it either passes or it doesn't, or we don't vote on it. It is what it is, and if the other 3 members who aren't able to attend tonight, it happens. You know, it happens if you have to miss a meeting. And they need to do their research and they need to have conversation, and before anything is voted on, there's a discussion anyways. So there's going to be more discussion at our next meeting. So those are my $5 worth.
$5.
Tina?
Thank you. You answered so many questions in that speech. So thank you so
I've been
much.
building it all up. I've been holding it in.
Yeah, because I had a question for you and you answered. I mean, this committee's been 10 years old, so, you know, this can't be the first time that something like this would come up. And I actually wondered, and I think taking it to policy is a good idea, because I also wondered, with our school committee manual, what does that say about the subcommittees? So, because my understanding, and I've only been here, I don't know, I guess in my 3rd year now, I always thought, maybe this was just my perception, that in the subcommittees, we were a little more balanced. And I hear what Joe's saying, and I know specifically with the superintendent evaluation was a good example recently of what do we do in that case. But I always felt that in the subcommittees, we were more balanced. It was kind of 1-to-1. I don't even think I've been in a subcommittee where we were like, okay, hold on, you've got a half a vote and you've got a whole vote. We just all considered each other one. Now, I don't know, that may or may not even be written. I have no idea. But I'd have to look at the manual. But that's kind of I always thought we were balanced. And that's why when I was chair last year that I kept thinking, I want 2 Chatham people and 2 Harwich people, 2 Chatham people and 2 Harwich people, because I felt like that's where we balanced ourselves out. And that what was brought to the school committee was a bit more fair and vetted, and that's kind of was my thought on the whole thing, as far as subcommittees go.
Yeah, and I agree with subcommittees. I feel like a subcommittee, I don't know, the subcommittee is the recommendation. And
Right.
if there's no recommendation from the subcommittee, then the subcommittee can come and say, we had a split vote. We have no recommendation. We need the rest of the committee to help with that, because the subcommittee, they don't make the decisions. They bring the recommendation to the full committee to make the decision. So, but I think that's a policy conversation.
Yep.
Not a regional agreement, because again, best of my knowledge, I don't see subcommittees listed anywhere in there, so I think it's a policy. So I guess consensus-wise, do we have a consensus to let Scott tell Terry, our attorney, to send the draft redlined agreement to DESI for review. Again, clarifying what Meredith said, it's not approval, it's purely to look at it and say, nope, you can't say unless required by law or regulation for a motion. You can't have that, even though that's what they said last time. Do we have a consensus to do that?
Are you looking for just a nod?
A head nod would be a consensus. So, okay, so yes, please send this off to Mark to have him send to Desi, please. And then, I guess, as chair, I'm gonna put it on, it's gonna be on the agenda next week anyway, or next August 11th anyways, for reports and discussion. That's what it is. I feel like coming from the work group and having that conversation there, I believe that it should be an action item, because the conversation that we had was we were going to discuss it at this meeting as a first read and then bring it back at our next meeting for a vote. I would prefer not to put potential vote, just because I feel like a potential vote is usually led in with a shorter timeline than we usually require. So this is a normal timeline, first reading, vote at the next meeting. And a potential vote, I feel like, is usually when it misses that timeline for whatever reason. But again, just because it's an action item, A, we don't have to vote on it. If it's gets to that point that we're having this same dialogue next week, we don't have to vote on it. And B, it can fail if it's voted on, regardless. So I think that it will be on the agenda as a discussion, and it will be an action item on the August 11th meeting. And what happens at that meeting happens at that meeting. We can continue this conversation then and decide what the best way going forward is. Yes, clarification finger?
I'll go reach out to the members that aren't here and just offer to sit down with them and walk them through these changes. I'd also be happy to those who aren't part of that working group and that didn't get the second dose earlier this week. I'm happy to sit. Yeah, I'm happy to sit down. Sit down with any of you and just
Number 3.
because I just want to make sure that if people are voting on August 11th, that they've really had the time to process and understand, and it can be an educated vote, and that we're not spending time, lots of time clarifying. The other thing, just to sort of share an analogy here. I loved what Nancy said about, a regional agreement it's a living document. And, we're in executive session, discussing a contract that's a living document. And the nature of bargaining contracts, you enter into bargaining sessions with your union, and you put proposals on the table for the first few times, and you limit your scope, and here's what you're gonna talk about, and the negotiations might go on for another 3-4 months afterwards, and during that 3-4 months there are things that you start thinking about. Okay, here's what I'd like to change in the contract, but they're for next time. And I think so a contract's a living document, and you'll have things that come up, and it's like, okay, that there are things we're going to put in our tickler file between now and whenever this goes to town meeting. There'll be things that we're going to want to go and address on the next review, and that list might increase over time. So it's the nature of living documents, whether it's this or a labor contract.
And to follow up, it's not required we only touch it every 5 years. It's required that we touch it at least every 5 years, and we review it at least every 5 years. So
Or every year, as the case may be.
or, every year, or every month, or, just constantly. So, Jackie?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think similar to what I had said earlier, that this is the first reading, and that makes sense, and that we can still have a conversation or discussion at the second reading. But what I also wanted to emphasize is I don't want to discourage anyone. It's the first reading. to come prepared with questions and concerns, because this is the time to talk about it. And this is the time when we as members, when we haven't had the opportunity to hear each other's and how we feel, to be like, to hear what they're saying and agree or disagree with them, because that's what we're here for. And it is a living document, which means we're always going to be making changes, and even the smallest update, like unless otherwise required by law or regulation, can prompt a much larger conversation, which is what happened tonight. And I don't want to discourage that from the second reading night, because there will be 3 members who will have not been here and likely will not, maybe not have watched this meeting and had this opportunity to have these conversations. And hopefully they do come prepared, because that's our job. We're supposed to come prepared with conversation and with questions and need clarification, because that's what we're all doing here, right? So I just want to clarify that for the public and for myself and my fellow members, that, and also, even though it's a living document, we all know the reality of how slow moving this can go. So I think in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, if we can change all the things we want to right now, wouldn't that be great? And yes, it's not ideal and it's not realistic. And as long as you have something in here that you're passionate about and you want to move forward on it, and it is a living document, then you've got to put the homework in and bring it up to the committee and keep moving forward on it. Because that's how the changes are made. So otherwise, I'm done.
Tina?
One last comment. The other thing that strikes me about this document, there's a lot of red. And can you imagine standing on the town meeting floor and answering a bunch of questions?
Let's make it green.
So I would just say that however we move forward with this, that we just have to anticipate that we might have people jumping up and talking about weighted voting or whatever else, that might be in here, because it's a lot of red. And I think you said it's been 5 years, right, since it's been in front of a town meeting?
Oh, no, it's been 10.
Okay, so it's been a long time. So
We tried several
Yeah.
times.
I mean, yeah.
3 times.
So this
Several
is
times.
overdue.
No,
and
we've
yeah.
reviewed it. It doesn't have to go to town meeting, it just has to be looked at, and we've been looking at it.
Yeah, we've definitely been looking at it.
So we've done our due diligence there.
Yeah. So, and again, with my working group hat on, I know the ideal thing would be to get it into the fall town meeting. And without my working group hat, I could certainly see, looking at all this red, why people need more time with this. So, there you go.
All right, so I have one follow-up, and then we're moving on. Do you think it would be worthwhile to add in a meeting in 2 weeks to have a discussion, so that we could still have a discussion on it, only that, nothing else on the agenda-ish, and then still look to vote on August 11th? Do you think it would be more appropriate to squeeze in another meeting with hopefully all 8 members present for a discussion, so that on our August 11th meeting, it in theory should be a full second reading of a full committee?
So a special meeting.
Yes, so we only had one meeting in July,
Yep.
and so we could in theory add the second meeting in July back that was erased 10. So it's still kind of there, but not really. Go ahead, Tina.
So
And Jack.
my comment there would be, we've got 3 people here, so we don't know what their schedules are, even if they're even open to this. If we do something like that, I would recommend virtual. It might be easier for people to attend. Perhaps we put a time limit, no more than an hour. This is our one topic. This is it. Everybody do your homework, because we've done something like that in the past where people still showed up and didn't do their homework. So I think I would put some criteria if we did something like that.
Okay, good idea. Jack?
I would say I completely agree with you, Tina, 100%, but I would go on the latter side of, let's just keep moving forward. It's a business meeting. It's scheduled,
Okay.
and let's just keep going. Because it may get held up no matter what. And if you add an additional meeting, all you're doing is adding another meeting for all of us to go over exactly what we just did again.
So we'll just make sure that we point out I'm sorry, does anybody else have thoughts? Point out that, watch the video. It's important.
Yes.
It was good
It was really good.
so far.
In slow motion, watch the video.
You can watch it at like time and a half. All right, moving on to our next report and discussion is the first reading of policy file DBJ, Budget Transfer Authority. So this is a policy that was actually brought to us at our last meeting. Mr. Russell had a question on it, and the question was clarified. So his question was the last sentence of the policy or actually the last paragraph. All funds I'm sorry, does somebody on policy want to do this, or is that?
Jackie, you want to take it?
I'm sorry.
Or
You can take it,
do
it's
we
fine.
remember? No, what, you're right on.
Okay.
Keep
so the-
going. Yeah.
I didn't want to usurp. I wasn't sure where it went to and from. I just know that I had the
Yeah.
answer. So Terry's question was the last paragraph, all funds in a general account not expended by the close of the fiscal year will be placed in an excess and deficiency fund not to exceed 5% of the operating budget. Yes, we all know that and understand that. The last sentence states, any added funds shall be returned to the member municipalities as outlined in MGL Chapter 71, Section 16B and a half, or 1/2. So Terry's question was, well, we don't return funds because we have an E&D. The response was that MGL Chapter 71, Section 16B and a half is any funds that are in excess of the 5% of the operating budget will be returned in the next budget year to the towns. So that's a Mass General Law. That's not saying that the excess funds not expended by the close of the fiscal year but will be returned. That's when it's in excess of 5%, which is all general law, which we all know. So with that information, and didn't feel comfortable bringing that to the committee as a second read, so we brought it back as a first read to kind of digest that information, and then it'll come to the next meeting for a vote. So any questions from there can be directed to the policy subcommittee. Any questions on this file DBJ? All right, moving on. Subcommittee reports, we see none. Student superintendent's report. Dr. Carpenter, make it brief.
Make it brief? Sure. Just in terms of recognitions, find my recognition here. This summer, Monomoy's committed to supporting our families with free meals for students. Sorry. This summer, Monomoy's committed to supporting our families with free meals for students. The Monomoy Regional School District Summer Meal Program will be providing free meals to kids and teens each Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. at both the high school and middle school. Families can pick up 7 meals per child each week, which is a combination of pre-prepared individual meals and groceries such as fresh fruits and vegetables and half gallons of both white and chocolate milk. The Monomoy Food Services Director is managing this program with the support of his staff. Then just in terms of other quick things, all things COVID, CDC in the last week put out guidance for schools that is basically suggesting that that individuals who are unvaccinated should still wear masks in schools, but that we are getting to a place where unvaccinated individuals could be in school buildings, or like we are now at a school committee meeting. So we can imagine that there's a good chance as we head into this upcoming year, given that vaccines are only available for individuals that are 12 and up, that we may be looking at some sort of hybrid on whether individuals are wearing masks or not wearing masks. Again, we're going to still see what the COVID trends are. I am a little concerned, as I think, as our health officials, that there's been an uptick in Massachusetts and on the Cape. I think there's concerns about the Delta variant. There's concerns that there are some individuals who have been vaccinated who have been coming down with COVID. So there's a lot that we still are going to have to look at. We will be making some decisions, I presume the state will be giving more and more guidance as we head into August. So we can expect an update, a more certain update on what the upcoming school year looks like in August. But there's some positive things out there, and there still continues to be some worries.
Why aren't you just the bearer of good news? Any questions for Dr. Carpenter? All right, so we move into our action items. First up is the Unit C contract for 2021 through 2024. That was actually what our executive session was about. Over the last several weeks, the negotiations subcommittee has been meeting with the Unit C group to review their contract. And I think the negotiations went very well. I'm very thankful for the group that we met with. It was virtual again. But I think that, we were able to successfully go through their contract and look at ways to improve it on both sides. They improved some of theirs and we improved it on our side as well. So I'm not sure you want to dive into some of the details.
Yeah,
I know
I
the
could
financial details, but the
Yeah,
other
I
stuff.
could do a quick summary. One of the things I appreciated, we started off this meeting with Cindy Gushy just providing the MTA Bill of Rights and for our educational support professionals. Cafeteria workers are educational support professionals, and the first line of what Cindy presented to us, it says a living wage. All education support professionals should be paid a living wage. And one of the key things that we strive to achieve in this negotiation is making sure that initial step that people are put on is a living wage. So, so we had a number of steps in our contract. We have agreed to have 5 of the 5 steps get removed from the contract, so that the the people that are starting here are getting paid within a few cents of $18 an hour. That becomes sort of the foundation of helping achieve that. And then the other financial pieces are that we would be coupling onto that a 1% COLA on the on this year's above this year's salary grid, which should then pull that grouping into that $18 an hour range. And then in the out years, it's a 2.75% in year 2 and a 2.5%. Do I have that backwards?
No, 275, 275.
275, 275, sorry. In the out 2 years, are the financial pieces there. And again, I think the want there was really to that was what we were talking about, is that supporting that concept of living wage.
Okay, thank you. So that is an action item. We did approve it in executive session. We do need to approve that contract in a public session, so I entertain a motion. Somebody use the words. Use your
I
words.
move we approve the Unit C contract for 2021 to 2024 as outlined by Dr. Carpenter.
Thank you.
And as we approved in our executive session.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Next on the action items are prior year encumbrances. That E word. Can't seem to get it out of my tongue. Encumbrances. There in your packet is an explanation and a motion. Mr. McMillan is on vacation this week. Entertain a motion for that from anybody? Ms. Long?
Motion to approve the rolling over of, I move to approve the rolling over of the FY21 encumbrances into the FY22 in the amount of $97,049.08.
Thank you. And
Second.
thank you. A second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Next up is the second reading of policy file JIB, student involvement in decision-making. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Oh,
We have a motion first.
Yes.
And then discussion. So motion to approve? Jackie, you so moved? And a second?
second.
Discussion, Ms. Games?
The only discussion was what I had mentioned at the last meeting. There is an amendment, because because it's the first year of this, the June is the date, and I don't have it, I guess,
It's
right
on
in
the
front
back
of me.
of.
It's on the
it's-
back.
Oh, it's on the back.
Yeah.
Joe.
Of the fraud one.
Oh, okay. So, anyway,
Thank you.
but we
Didn't
need
see it.
to vote based on the understanding that there is an amendment.
The verbal
Um,
amendment?
you've got
Holy
it. I
criminy, my
don't have-
tongue is.
It's- There you go.
Yes,
Verbal
thank you.
amendment.
Yes. A verbal amendment that just for this first year, the election of these student committee members, I guess, Student Advisory Committee, will be done this fall. And it's only for the first year, and then it will go forward with June, or how it's outlined here, June, first day of June.
Okay.
Do you want me to amend my motion? Or? is it fine the
Yes.
way it is?
No, I think we're okay, because it's a verbal amendment anyways, that in there. So we're approving the policy as presented with the, no, actually, yes. Let's amend your motion,
Okay.
please, if you so choose.
I'm going to amend my motion,
You're gonna check your emotions, and
I'm
then you're
gonna
gonna
amend
amend your
my
motion.
motion to approve the student involvement in decision-making file JIB policy as presented, including a verbal, one-time amendment that the, hold on, I just had it right here. That the, advisory committee shall by majority vote in the fall of 2021
For this year.
for this year only.
And then who was the second?
I think it was you, T.
Oh, was it me?
I thought it was you.
I think it was Meredith.
Oh, second.
It was me.
Meredith, do you still second her amended motion? Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you. And the second reading of policy DIF, district fraud policy. Motion to approve, please.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Give it to
I think
Tina.
that was
It's kind of a
Tina.
tie.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion is unanimous. The last action item is the declaration of surplus. Someone?
I would like to make a motion to approve all items to surplus as presented in our packet.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Discussion. Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, that's unanimous. Thank you. And our last order of business is a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That is I'm sorry, any opposed? Thank you. That's unanimous. We are adjourning at 8:54 PM, and our next meeting is August 11th, Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank
If I
you.
say it a lot, I
Yes.
might get it in my brain.
A Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Is anyone heading